Hello, and welcome to this Australia-New Zealand Women's Declaration International webinar for January 2025. My name is Janet Fraser, coming to you from Gundunger, west of Sydney. I'm the convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. Tonight I have Anna Kerr and Bronwyn Williams from the Feminist Legal Clinic doing tech with me. Actually, they're our solicitors, but they are multi-purpose. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, but particularly the women of this continent. We have 4 speakers tonight, whom I'll introduce in turn. A reminder that the presentation is recorded and question time is not. When we end for question time, I'd appreciate it if women use the Q&A box for written questions so I don't lose them in the chat. If you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand icon and I will keep a running list of the order in which I see you appear. And now to introduce our excellent speakers. Elisabeth is a mum of 2 young girls, a proud TERF sympathiser and a retired lawyer with 25 years experience. Amongst other campaigns, Elisabeth arranged for a group of women to go to an event called A Conversation on Women's Advancement with Australia's first and only so far female Prime Minister Julia Gillard to see if they could ask her some questions. She, Biddy O'Loughlin and the rest of TERF world are still waiting for her to answer the question, what is a woman? And whether she regrets removing girls and women's sex-based rights from the Sex Discrimination Act. Elisabeth's legal experience is across a range of areas, and she has worked in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and in the Federal Court. She has worked for the equivalent of the Crown Solicitors for both the Northern Territory and most recently with the ACT Government Solicitor, a completely captured organisation. Elisabeth has hosted spaces on X during the Deeming and Pesutto matter, and her favourite writer is Jonathan Swift and his essay A Modest Proposal, which inspires her to always do better on developing solutions to improve society's ills. Carol Ann is the spokeswoman for the Lesbian Action Group. In September 24, LAG appealed a decision from the Australian Human Rights Commission denying them an exemption to publicise and run lesbian-only events. The results of that appeal came out last Monday. Carol will talk about the decision and its implications for lesbians and for women in general in Australia. Julieta is one of the trans widows featured in Vaishnavi Sundar's documentary Behind the Looking Glass. Tonight, Julieta is going to share her experience of doing the interview for Behind the Looking Glass, what it was like watching the film, and seeing and hearing other trans widows sharing their stories. Angie Jones is a mother of 4 who lives on a hobby farm on Woiwurrung land just outside Melbourne. She is best known as one of the organisers of the notorious Let Women Speak rally and was defamed alongside Moira Deeming. Angie is currently working as a peer support coordinator for a domestic violence program. This hasn't been without its challenges, as the sector has been crippled by poorly channelled funding and the stealthy removal of single-sex services. This is what she wants to talk to us about today. So, welcome, and over to Elisabeth.
Thanks, Janet, and thank you, everyone. So, we're talking about the hero's journey of Moira Deeming today. She managed to get into Parliament. Everything was going really well. She did an amazing maiden speech on women's sex-based rights, and then it all went to custard on the 18th of March of 2023 when she attended the Let Women Speak rally in Melbourne, which is now notorious amongst TERF world and notorious amongst the political world now as well, because she got the scalp of the year in Australia when it comes to horrible men. Mr. Pesutto, who lost his position as the Victorian Liberal leader on the 29th of December. Anyway, so early Christmas present to Moira Deeming last year on the 12th of December. Justice O'Callaghan of the Federal Court found the former Victorian Liberal leader, and as he liked to refer to himself, Victoria's alternative premier, John Pesutto, had defamed her as a Nazi and awarded her a total of $315,000. It was $300,000 and then $15,000 interest. She had offered to settle the matter January, February of 2024 for $100,000. And because of that, he is going to be up for the majority of her costs. Defamation John, as he's now known. Defo Jono. I like to say he always talked like, he was Churchillian, Winston Churchill, this is my destiny, I'm a modern inclusive leader. And I think he was not a man of destiny, but he certainly met his destiny when he met with Moira Deeming and Justice O'Callaghan. So the exact defamation findings, so on the costs issue, so he's going to be up for millions of legal costs, both of his own and hers. Normally you might get up to 70% of your legal costs, but because he rejected what was a reasonable offer and she got more than that, he'll be up for anywhere from 90 to 100% of her costs from January, February last year, which is another, good on you, John. Well done. I'm very impressed with you. I'm not a leader of destiny, John Pesutto. Yeah, it's quite funny. So the judge found that he had defamed Moira as being unfit to be in the Parliamentary Liberal Party and the Liberal Party because she knowingly associated with neo-Nazis and Nazis. She sympathised with neo-Nazis and white supremacists and helped promote Nazi, white supremacist and ethno-fascist views. So he went on a media blitz after the Let Women Speak rally. So Let Women Speak rally happens on the Saturday, all explodes on the Sunday for her. He has this, what I call the Star Chamber in the afternoon, where basically says you either resign or I'm gonna move for your expulsion. Then he does the media release on the Sunday night where the judge referred to her as a neo-Nazi associate, with Angie Jones being in the panelist room tonight. We have a very important guest here, or presenter. And then on the Monday, and through the court, I think on the Monday he went on a media blitz. He did an interview on 3AW. He did an interview with the ABC. And then that's right, the dossier. He leaked the dossier to The Age, which had all the other defamatory imputations. And then he did the press conference. I don't know if that was on the Monday or it was later in that week. I think it was post the meeting. So he moved to expel her. The obvious thing is calling someone a Nazi is really bad. And that was found to be so by the judge. And the judge found that he had no basis at all to find that she was any of those things, and demonstrably she was never any of those things because Kelly J. Keane and Angela Jones were none of those things, and the whole case basically rested on Kelly J. Keane and her wide-ranging interviews with people perhaps that you'd normally not want to be interviewed by, but when it was obviously when you looked at it, it wasn't that she agreed with any of the statements of these people she'd been interviewed or stood next to, that it was clear that she abhorred that ideology. And with Angie Jones and her tweet, I'm just realising I'm weaving a little bit here. So Angie Jones, because I'm looking at you, Angie, I feel like talking about you in particular. Angie Jones has the notorious tweet, was it women and Nazis don't like pedo filth or pedo scum or whatever. I'm sorry, I'm getting the wording wrong, Angie. I know it's important, that wording as well. Why don't you? And yes, Edie White, who I think I saw in the chat, has done a brilliant Substack on just before Christmas, and subsequently an article in The Spectator going through the ridiculousness of the case that Pesutto and his counsel put on about how there was this link. It was reasonable for him to draw a link between the neo-Nazis that attended the rally and had the banner, pedo filth, and the attendees of the Let Women Speak rally because of Angie Jones' tweet, because something Kelly J. Keane had said in a video. Sorry, Edie White addresses some of these, but the issue and the very long bow that the judge infamously raised with the counsel during the hearing is, what is the link between the neo-Nazis and the Let Women Speak rally, and one of the big arguments they put on was that you had Angie Jones talking about pedos. There was an obvious link that all LGBTQ women's rights advocates against some of this trans ideology always said that, you know, your transphobia means you're a pedophile. And then Kelly J. Keane had said some stuff about transsexuals and transgenderism and pedophilia or paraphilia. And then a couple of other things too, which I'll go through. So anyway, it was bizarre. Judge said it's a load of crock, basically, in his decision. It was a slam dunk. He was so appalled by it. He really was in the judgment. And the defences available to Pesutto are ones that are applicable to journalists, politicians, mass media, and include the public interest. And one of the reasons why it wasn't necessarily people didn't think it would be, even after seeing the hearing and seeing how badly it had gone for him, that there was still a chance that he could get up, is that there are such robust defences available to politicians and mass media in being able to say things about politicians. So she's a politician, he's a politician. You can say a lot of really awful things about politicians and not actually be found to have defamed them. I mean, you know, we all say a lot of things about politicians. But what you can't do is say that we now have it established. You can't actually say that a politician is a Nazi or neo-Nazi or white supremacist or ethno-fascist when it's not actually true, even if you have all these wonderful defences. So the test or the hurdle for him to get over was a lot lower. And for her to get over was a lot higher. For him to get over was a lot lower. And she got over it really easily because the evidence was so appalling for him. It was so appalling. Oh my goodness. I still remain shocked to this day how appalling he and his collaborators behaved in this matter. I've said on Spaces on X before, I went into this hearing thinking that they had just done a really sloppy research and had just looked at Wikipedia. But in actual fact, they had done sloppy research, but they'd done research enough that by the time he, certainly on the Monday, but certainly that Sunday, but on the Monday when he went on his media blitz, he knew what he was saying was not true. He escaped a bullet in the judgment because the judge said, generally, I do not find him a dishonest witness, but while he wasn't killed with a bullet to the head by the judge in the decision, a close reading of the decision, he was found by the judge to have been dishonest. His evidence was untrue. He was gratuitously offensive and shameful in relation to the evidence that he gave about Maura Deeming's bad reputation. And then, as I said, you know, careful reading would show that he behaved incredibly appallingly. One of the things that came out of the judgment for me as a TERF that I found really interesting and felt good as a TERF is how successful Maura Deeming and her counsel had been in convincing the judge that advocating for women's sex-based rights and against the gender mutilation, my words, of children did not automatically or mean that you are someone with a bad reputation or give succor to hateful opinions. And she had given evidence in relation to Kelly J. Keane coming to Australia, and she had given evidence that her understanding of Kelly J. Keane's advocacy at the time was it was an organisation run by Ms. Keane which advocates for the preservation and or reinstatement of reasonable biological sex-based rights, such as female-only bathrooms and change rooms, as well as against the irreversible and harmful medical transitioning practices used on gender, non-conforming, autistic and gay minors, and that the organisation was mainstream and global, etc. For me, the success of the way Deeming put the case to the judge, and she was lucky to find a judge that seemed to come to the case without any preconceived notions or real understanding and knowledge of the TERF wars and the war on women. But she put a case very successfully that the issues that Let Women Speak or other women involved in different organisations is that he was arguing that reputation meant she had a reputation of giving succor to hateful views. And what he said is it can be accepted that Mrs. Deeming's expressed views on such things as the preservation or reinstatement of biological sex-based rights and her opposition to medical transitioning practices used on gender non-conforming, autistic and gay minors are controversial or polarising. Very important. He used air quotes in the judgment, and their air quotes became very important because Angie used air quotes in the Notorious video when describing the Nazis, and they were most upset about that. So it's quite that those views are controversial and polarising in the sense that other political constituencies disagree with her on it often strongly, but that is not the same thing as saying that she had a, quote, bad reputation. And I think as TERFs we can take some succor from that because not only has she successfully convinced the judge that it's reasonable to advocate for those matters, but she's convinced the judge that it doesn't mean that you are a bad person, ergo, nor a Nazi. So what he also said is, I mean, he didn't say this in terms, I've got the heading, the Nazi slur is actually really bad. What he said is the imputations I have found, so the defamation that he's found John Pesutto did, the imputations I have found to have been carried are very serious ones. In my view, as Mrs. Deeming submitted, they are inherently likely using mass media to communicate a message to the general public in Victoria to cause serious harm to Mrs. Deeming's reputation. This is especially so in circumstances where the leader of her own parliamentary party was moving for her expulsion from it. What was the interesting is the evidence led unchallenged, and this is what the judge said. Witnesses also gave unchallenged evidence of the likely impact of the publications on Mrs. Deeming's reputation. And I think it's Richard Riordan, he's one of the MPs, correct me if I'm wrong. His evidence was, in my view, an allegation of being a Nazi or a Nazi sympathiser is one of the most serious allegations that can be made about a person, and is like an allegation of being a murderer or a pedophile or a rapist. I think everyone I know in my personal and political circles would share that opinion. These sort of allegations never leave a person. Nobody wants anything to do with such a person. This was such a cruel thing to be inflicted on Mrs. Deeming. The reason I highlighted that in this talk is that I know that in Carol's case in LAG, the Australian Human Rights Expert Commission referred to LAG and Let Women Speak as neo-Nazi fascists, and I'm personally exploring making a professional conduct complaint against the solicitor and barrister for allowing this evidence to be led unchallenged and presenting. No, they didn't allow it to be led. They presented this evidence by their expert and allowed it to stay. Now, I haven't read the decision and how the AAT member dealt with it, but I did a little bit of research on this today, and there is case law and there are professional rules of conduct that you can't make a really serious claim about someone, whether it's criminal like murder, rape, or a very serious misconduct where you don't have evidence to make that assertion. And I'm interested to know what the professional bodies will make of an in-house legal team for the Commonwealth calling a witness to say that lesbians seeking to exclude a man from meeting are similar to neo-Nazis. And I think the comments in the judgment, the Deeming judgment, are very helpful for that, to show how appalling it is, and that if they had actually done the minor bit of research that was presented to show that it simply wasn't true, then they shouldn't have actually presented that evidence. So I'm keen to proceed with that. Happy to hear from Carol tonight if she has any views on that. I'm no longer practicing as a solicitor, so I'm not actually under any professional obligations to be careful in making a professional conduct allegation. As a solicitor, you can't just just like you can't throw the Nazi slur around, you can't just casually say you're guilty of professional misconduct. No longer practicing. I'm going to make the claim. I just like to stir up anyway, even if they doesn't get up, because they need to be held to account. So I've got 3 more minutes. So I'll talk about, let me just have a look. Yeah, so in the final days of the hearing, it was wonderful to watch from a TERF perspective, because, again, Pesutto and his counsel, I think, were actually ultimately ideologically captured, that their actual viewpoint of women advocating for sex-based rights, that all they had to say was transphobic and the judge would be on their side. And a big part of their case was how appalling Kelly J. Keane, Angie Jones, Let Women Speak, anyone involved in this movement were. And they played a whole lot of videos from the interview with Pepe Le Pew Garapay, the ethno-white nationalist from Canada, that Kelly J. Keane did, to some other interviews, to an interview. Yeah, so lots of different videos, which were just wonderful for us to watch, including a Let Women Speak rally and all, all the wonderful speeches that happened, including the infamous was it "I'm a dickhead" or something? You know, you'd be a dickhead speech by Stacia Fry, which was apparently the most appalling speech, and one of the reasons why one should find that simply attending this rally would mean that you're a neo-Nazi. And the infamous comment made while the judge is having to watch all these videos, and I can't remember which one it was. It might have been the one. It might have been the one where Kelly J. Keane, she was having the protesters were saying, "You're a fascist, Kelly Jo's a fascist," and she goes, fascist is the new word for legend. And I don't know, one of the videos that came up, and the judge goes, "That what's the purpose of this?" And the young junior barrister goes on at length while stroking his beard. He's going, "Well, Your Honour, well, you see, we've got Angie Jones and her tweet, and we've got Kelly J. Keane and her talking about paraphilia and transgenderism, and we've got this and that, and the flag by the neo-Nazis saying pedo freaks and etc., etc." And the judge goes, "That's a very, very long bow." And indeed it was a very long bow for Mr. Pesutto, and he did not meet his target. Rather, Maura Deeming turned it around at him and hit him straight in the centre. It was a wonderful thing. So that's my 20 minutes. Thank you. I hopefully will be back for some questions afterwards. I do have to go and put my children to bed, so I'll be listening, but probably won't be able to come back for another half an hour now. But I will be listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was marvellous. We really appreciate it. It was a very fascinating watch. It made me very excited to study defamation, which I'm doing right now.
So, right, well done.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Elisabeth. That was wonderful. And we won't get to questions for another 45 minutes or so. So, longer probably. So next up, ta-da, we have the lovely Carol Ann. Carol, please go ahead.
Okay, here I am, and thank you for having me here. I'm spokesperson for the Lesbian Action Group, and on Monday we had the decision come down from the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, now the Administrative Review Tribunal, undergone a change. And so I want to go through some of the stuff that was in that decision. I'm not a legal person, and it's a bit intimidating to know that there's Elisabeth and Anna and probably some others who are legal people who understand it a bit more. But I'm a lay person, and here's some of the things that I picked out from that decision. You can, if you haven't seen it, it's on our website with all the other bits and pieces about our case. So you can go to lesbianactiongroup.org.au and find our website and read the stuff for yourself if you haven't already done so. So the case itself was the Lesbian Action Group versus the Australian Human Rights Commission. And we applied to the AHRC for a temporary exemption under the Sex Discrimination Act to publicise and run events for lesbians only, and the exemption was refused. So in 2024, we appealed that decision at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and on Monday we found out that the decision was upheld, i.e. the exemption was refused again. And this is what Member Stuart Fenwick said about in his decision making. In summary, the applicants identify as a discrete minority. So we lesbians are a discrete minority. And what I think he means by that is sex realist lesbians are a discrete minority within a group in the community that is already identified by their sex and sexual orientation. So we are afforded protection of the SDA. You wouldn't believe it from their decisions, but so they say. And we, FLAG, seek to actively discriminate against another group, that's men who want to be lesbians. Anything in italics here is my is what I've inserted to do away with their gender speak, because their whole decision is coached in gender speak. And unless we undo that, excuse me, unless we undo that language and put the real language there, then it doesn't make sense. So we want to discriminate against men who want to be lesbians, who are identifiable by their gender identity. And Mr. Fenwick has determined that endorsing overt acts of discrimination cannot be the intended effect of the exemption power in the SDA. I don't know what the intended effect, in fact, is, because granting an exemption, by definition, means that you are exempt and you are allowed to discriminate. So, right off the bat, the logic doesn't make sense, in my layperson's opinion. So one of the things that was argued, and that we as TERFs are quite well aware of, is that, sorry, here we go, is that the SDA and the AHRC are establishing a hierarchy, and that trans far outweighs sex and sexual orientation. So it was contended that the approach taken in the decision under review highlights the rights of the trans community. This was said to have the effect of creating a hierarchy of rights. LAG, accordingly, oppose a construction of the SDA that in any way imposes a hierarchy. It was contended that discrimination and equality are two sides of the same coin, but the granting of a temporary exemption permits discrimination. So they say, the AHRC, submitted that the SDA does not establish a hierarchy of rights holders, nor does it involve a balancing exercise between the rights of men who want to be women and lesbians. All persons are entitled to the protection under the legislation, and a decision to depart from the, and here I've underlined, norm sought to be established by the SDA is not unfettered. So this is their line, that they've established a norm, and we can't challenge that. So it's the AHRC and the SDA has established this norm where they say there is no hierarchy, but that we can't discriminate against gender identity, no matter what. Some of the reasoning they give, or I've said here, Stuart Fenwick gives. The problematic nature of this issue arises for the intersectional features of lesbian identity. Now, what are the intersectional features of lesbian identity? Lesbians are females who are attracted to other females. Where's any intersectional features there? Well, they come up with the intersectional features, which is the meaning the intersection of sexual identity and sexual orientation with that of people who want to be seen as the opposite sex, i.e. transgender persons. So this is some of the problematic nature of this issue. And the grant of an exemption would potentially demonstrate the redundancy of the protected gender characteristic. Yes, that's what we're after. This cannot be understood as consistent with the scope and purpose of the SDA. So they've made their rules and they're sticking to it. Stuart Fenwick does not consider the evidence and arguments raised to have made a substantive case that lesbians born female in particular experience substantive inequality compared to men who say they are lesbians. And he says, I must therefore proceed with the further application of the SDA. So you can see what we're up against. The Sex Discrimination Act is what we're bumping our heads against. They've made their rules and they're using that as reasons to discriminate against us. And he further says that he means by this, in the context of the present facts, that an exemption that actively creates or promotes discrimination that did not previously exist should not be permitted. So the fact that nobody has challenged so-called trans lesbians and made a precedent, then they can't permit it. So we need more challenges, girls. We need more challenges in the courts. The arguments for the exemption, and these are just some of them that are put in the decision. If you want to know more, go to the website and read more of the submissions put in. So we reiterated our objection to two key points. That is, it was contended that the proposition that not inviting certain people, i.e. not inviting men who want to be lesbians to an event, creates a risk of harm to those men should be rejected and is outrageous. So us saying that we wouldn't want men who want to be lesbians at an event, they said that that creates a risk of harm to those men, and we say bullshit, basically. It was further contended that the application, that's us, have advanced substantive evidence demonstrating the risk of harm to lesbians who challenge the trans rights agenda, which we did. We put up lots and lots of examples of from X and other places where it's quite obvious that it's violence and intimidation and harm meant to us. But apparently that wasn't enough. So we also confirmed that we don't consider a person who is born male can change their gender. And that was quite liberating to be able to say that in court, I must say, even though they didn't, apparently he doesn't believe me. In response to a follow-up question from myself, she confirmed the view that this is a statement of fact. Of course it is. She stated that she had not seen any convincing evidence to say people can change sex, rather it was a belief that people held. We also put Professor Sheila Jeffries was our expert witness. She states the facts that lesbian women women being lesbians was previously an uncontentious matter, but now needs to be expressed because the gender identity movement that the idea that beings can change sex and that men, persons of the male sex, cannot only be women but lesbians. And Professor Jeffries was absolutely amazingly wonderful in her evidence that she gave. And it appeared that Stuart Fenwick was quite captured by her, but obviously not enough to change his mind. He also says some quite important evidence was advanced concerning the support provided by LAG to young women who are experiencing distress from their personal gender transition. Oh dear, but this, however, this itself does not necessarily present a compelling reason to discriminate against people who have experienced a different form of gender transition. So the fact that young women who are detransitioning or desisting need support, and LAG is giving them that support or opening up avenues whereby they can get that support, it's not a compelling reason to discriminate against those other lot who have their own form of transition troubles. The subject of public controversy and protest, captured by the concept of the trans exclusionary radical feminist, that's us TERFs. I understand the applicant's position to be that the material lodged and aspects of the evidence at the hearing demonstrate that feminists who challenge the currently accepted legal framework, that's us, recognising gender as we're subject to severe criticism and their safety may be at risk in public events. But while I have a substantial body of material indicating opposition, i.e. hate, violence, threats, to the broad stance of the applicants and those of a similar perspective with respect to the right of men who want to be women, I do not consider this to be of particular value in support of the request for an exemption. So here it is in black and white. It doesn't matter how much research and proof and in your face stuff that we show them, they don't consider this to be of particular value. We get some arguments against the exemption. This was from the AHRC. The underlying premise of the application that a person's sex cannot be changed and that trans women, i.e. men, could neither be women nor lesbians is contrary to the clear intention of the 2013 amendments to the SDA. So here we go again, banging our heads against the SDA. The AHRC has determined that that's what the SDA stands for. With respect to the matter of the underlying policy behind the SDA, I, Member Fenwick, consider it would be perverse outcome to grant an exemption on the basis that the applicants consider the law to be inappropriate. or based on unsubstantiated science, or on other policy grounds that are no longer considered sustainable. So again, doesn't matter what evidence we put up, SDA all the time, banging our heads against it. I just have to put up Dr. Eleanor Jeffries' expert witness. This is just some of her statements that the tribunal allowed to stand. The AHRC presented her as their expert witness, and they allowed her to say this bullshit. In her written statement, Dr. Eleanor Jeffries sets out her qualifications and experience, which includes certain academic experience and the history of lesbian feminism. Now, if you read the transcript of the tribunal, that you'll know that that is rubbish. She has no experience whatsoever in terms of feminist. Her experience is in sex work and with Scarlet Women. So, and here's her theory of feminism. The interpretation of different strands within the movement are briefly, we've got option A, feminism, which promotes the belief that anti-lesbian tendencies are a function of patriarchy. Well, yes. And a smaller subset of which maintains a binary understanding of sex. So LAG and those lesbians who, or no, those feminists, sorry, because this is not about lesbians. This is those feminists are a smaller subset of option A who maintain that binary understanding of sex. And then we've got option B, which is a capitalist theory that promotes marriage and board representation. And we've got option C that sees lesbophobia as a function of capitalism, whatever that means. She's made this up as a explanation of feminism. And we are a minority within a minority. Further questions address Dr. Jeffries' views. I hope I'm not going over time here. She explicitly stood by her opinion that a subset of option A lesbian feminists hold views similar to those of Nazi fascists. She stated that she observed this and similar rallies internationally and noted the willingness of lesbian feminists, including Professor Sheila Jeffries, to attend in the presence of Nazi fascists. Dr. Jeffries described the similarity in views as being that fascism is totally fine with exclusion on the basis of difference. You can read more of Dr. Jeffries' statements in the decision. Yes, but there clearly she calls us Nazi fascists, and that this subset, and that includes all of you, I must say, because I'm assuming you're all feminists, of the kind that doesn't believe that you can change sex. We have more in common with Nazi fascists than the other strands of lesbian feminists. Here's a little bit about temporary exemptions and the ludicrousness of even having that in the SDA, because apparently you can't apply it. So briefly, what this paragraph is saying, that if they gave us a temporary exemption, the problem is that anyone that was associated with us would not have a temporary exemption, and therefore they would be liable for complaints based on discrimination. So sorry, got dogs coming in and out and kids and whatever. So if we hired a venue, then that venue would be liable to litigation. If we hired caterers for something, then the caterers would be liable for litigation. So what's the point of offering an exemption then? According to Mr. Fenwick, an additional consideration raised in response is the impact of the grant of an exemption upon members of the excluded community, being men who want to be women. So we have to consider the impact of it. So what's the point, really? I mean, exemptions are there to be able to discriminate in certain circumstances. If you're going to have to worry about who you're discriminating against and the impact on them, then again, there's no point in even having it in the Act. Here's a doozy. While I do not consider the possibility of public protest to be a sound basis for refusal, the hearing revealed that there is no solution yet defined to ensuring the enforceability of an exemption. The nature of control concerning attendance has been reduced by the applicants to the level of non-invitation, in that we said, well, no, if we have an exemption, all we would do is say that this is for lesbians only, and we have an exemption to do that. And they say, well, you can't enforce that then. So he says this potentially renders an exemption moot. So the protesters, the violent men, the predators win, because we can't have an exemption because they would protest us. Okay, that's about the other entities as well, like venues and caterers, etc., etc. So finally, the evidence of the parties diverges to some extent about the nature and impact of socialisation of the lesbian community in general. And that's why we wanted the exemption, because the lesbian community in a big country like Australia is really, really isolated. Unless we can publicly be visible and publicise our events, how do we find each other? We're a minority, a small minority in a big country. We need to be able to publicly advertise. So that's why we were going for the exemption. And he says, I do not consider that the challenges made in cross-examination to Dr. Jeffries' expertise damage the value of her evidence overall. So he's believing Eleanor Jeffries. She's got a good point, he says. It appears to me to be of similar quality and relevance to that of Professor Jeffries, and, according to Dr. Jeffries, is indeed built upon the professor's own work. So, madness. She read Sheila Jeffries' book and agrees with Sheila Jeffries, but is put up against us. So, as noted above, I accepted a general proposition that the lesbian community experiences inequality. Yes, we do. I consider the more pertinent issue to be whether the evidence of the applicants is adequate to contribute to justification of the exemption. On balance, I do not consider there to be sufficiently persuasive evidence that any continuing social marginalisation of the lesbian community in public can contribute to justification of the exercise of the discretion in this case. So basically, it doesn't matter what evidence we put up, doesn't matter what we say, we're not going to get an exemption. So that's gone over time. I'm sorry. That's my my presentation. I know that most people probably haven't read the decision, so hopefully you've got a little taste of what was said. And any questions, ask in the Q&A afterwards. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Janet.
Thanks so much, Carol. And a staggering decision. Like, it's one thing to say, well, the law says this, but there's also reality, and somehow we have to put reality back into the law. So thank you so much for championing the rights for lesbians and all women in the work that you're doing. Lesbians have long been the vanguard of the women's movement. So here you are. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to hand over to Julietta. Julietta, please.
Thank you, Janet. So I identify as Julietta, and I'm one of the trans widows featured in the recent documentary Behind the Looking Glass by Vaishnavi Sundar and Lime Soda Films. A quick background to my story is that I became what's known as a trans widow in 2022. That is, my husband at the time came out one evening and said to me that he is now a woman. And that's after I had been with him for 7 years and one little baby boy later. And he picked wonderful timing because he told me just a few weeks before our son's birthday that year. And when he did tell me about it, he had everything lined up and ready to go. So he had like his doctor's appointments all lined up. He had a separate closet in his office room that had all new clothes, underwear, silicone breasts. He had hair and nail appointments all booked for the coming weeks. So it was, yeah, he had done all that behind my back. So soon after, he became aggressive and violent towards me because I didn't go along with it. So I left the family home pretty soon. Didn't bother him though because he got his boyfriend to move in to the family home pretty much immediately and lied to me about it for several months. So that's a bit of the background of what happened. At that time, I didn't know about the gender ideology. I hadn't heard of the terms like gender critical, radical feminist, or TERF. I had no idea. All I knew, like at the time, was people can't change sex. I definitely didn't see him as a woman, and I knew that he will never become a woman. So that was just my own thinking at the time. Then I started searching online for information to see, are there any others who felt the way I felt, thought about it the way I thought about. That's when I found the 4-part documentary on YouTube. It's the film Dysphoric. So it was one of the very early pieces of material, I suppose, that I stumbled upon. I watched it. Not sure how much I absorbed it at the time. I felt a bit of a relief though, knowing that there were people out there who didn't go along with the ideology. That I wasn't alone in my thinking. But I still didn't think that film was all that relevant to me. I thought, that's a film in India about women and girls in India, and filmmaker. I just didn't think the filmmaker would be really interested in other countries or I guess my sort of story where you're kind of the person that's left behind when these people transition, quote unquote transition. I don't remember precisely how I got connected with Vaishnavi at the time, but I do remember it was pretty soon after I left my ex, and definitely not that long after I had seen Dysphoric. So I knew it was like Vaishnavi and Lime Soda Films had done that movie documentary, so I knew who I was talking to. We started communication through email at first, and then she reached out and made an appointment for an interview. online. I was very surprised to hear that, somebody was interested in the topic of trans widows. Um, so when we were in communication through email, some weeks had passed. By that time, I kept my online sort of research. I had come across this website called Trans Widow Voices, where there's like a collective of stories of other trans widows. I had read through some of them, and a common theme was that the lack of acknowledgement that the women received. And personally, I had experienced similar with my friends at the time and even some family members. So I was surprised and grateful that somebody was interested in hearing my side of the story. We did the interview. It was an evening for me. It might have been late 2022, maybe it was early 2023 when we did the interview. And everything was still very raw for me. I remember I was quite emotional. Vaishnavi was very professional. Um, she was very professional, but at the same time, she was very personable and sympathetic. She asked very open-ended questions, which I really liked, because it gave me the opportunity to just speak freely, elaborate, um, and just really get my get my emotions out to some extent as well. And she was a great listener. She listened intently, and she asked probing questions, but like it was never in an intrusive or in any insensitive way. So like I said, I was quite emotional and I felt a little bit embarrassed after the interview, and I just thought, oh, what a mess. I didn't think I gave anything useful to her in that interview, and to be honest, I'm still surprised she got any useful material out of that. So yeah, that was kind of how I felt about the interview and what I was feeling at the time. It was, I don't think it hadn't been a year since I left my ex at that time. I still had my son was still quite young. So yeah, it was, I felt really heard, and it was nice to know that a filmmaker, an advocate for women's rights, was actually interested in this subset of the bigger issue, I suppose. So obviously, because some between the interview and when the movie finally came out last year, because there was a bit of time, there were times that I thought like it might not happen. But at the same time, things moved along in my life. I made more new connections with other women who felt similar about these issues. I learned a lot. I got through the separation. I got through the divorce. My life was starting to improve in some ways. And in between, like after the interview and before the movie came out, during that period, I also came across a YouTuber called Uta Hagen, a grass widow. I wrote to her, and we started communicating. And then through that, I found out she had also done an interview with Vaishnavi for the film. And she was a great source of support for me because she had gone through it some years prior, and her children are all grown up now. So she was a little bit like, I guess, like a bit of a mother figure to me, helping me through process some of the emotions. And there were times that I said to her, oh, I don't think this film's going to happen. Like, I haven't heard much, because I was following Lime Soda Films and I was following Vaishnavi. I didn't, and I thought, oh, like, who's going to watch that film? Nobody's going to care. Maybe it's a really tough topic. Like, maybe nobody wants to hear about it. And Uta said, no, it'll come out. Don't worry. Like, she had so much faith, and she was right. So that was wonderful, and I guess looking back, it was really nice that people had faith and there were women that were hopeful about it. So, like I said, I was following Lime Soda Films and Vaishnavi on social media platforms, and it was really great to see every time she posted an update or like little snippets of the trailer. She put her fundraising and links and things like that. It was really like how should I describe it? It wasn't just like I was happy and joyful, but it was like I was really touched, and it really made me feel seen, and like like made me feel like what I went through was a real thing, and it's something that changed my life drastically. It's something that has so much impact on my son's life, who's still quite young, and we don't even know what the impact would be on him later down the track. And so it was, I was really touched. Um, and yeah, so when she finally announced the release date, I think I can't remember when that came out, the actual announcement, sometime in 2024. I was just so excited, but I was also a little bit nervous because I thought, oh, what if my ex found out about it? Um, will he retaliate? Will he take any legal action against me? But mind you, at that time, I didn't even know that I would be featured in the film because I knew that she had taken, a bunch of interviews and can't include everything. So, um, but there was always that worry, like, what if my ex found out, and then what if there was something he could do to take me to court? That's probably the most thing I was worried about the most. Like, what if he could take me to court over something? But then I thought, like, what can he possibly accuse me of? All I did was share what happened from my point of view. Um, Obviously, I didn't disclose any names or any identifying details. And what I spoke about was my emotions, how I processed it, how it affected me. So, you know, logically, like I couldn't think of any reason why or how he could accuse me of any wrongdoings on his behalf. So I put that worry aside and started really, really looking forward to seeing the film. So when the day came, I joined the live stream like many others. It was very early in the morning here in Australia. I watched it on my tablet. I remember I was still in bed. Um, and I was really like excited, nervous, all those feelings. And when I watched it, it was so much better than I ever imagined myself. Um, the topic was so streamlined through the film, it was so well presented. And I was quite pleasantly surprised to see myself in it because like I said, I was very emotional when I did the interview, several years ago. So I didn't think I would be featured in it at all. And it didn't matter. Like, I was just really happy to see a film about trans widows and the families of these men finally being released. So I was very pleasantly surprised to see little bits of my story in there too. The days that followed after that movie was uploaded, it was a little bit surreal because I kept getting a few text messages and a couple of phone calls from some of the women that I had met through over the past year or two. So they knew that I had done the interview, so they knew it was me. And it was so great to hear them praise like not me, but just praise the film and just say, like, some of these women, they were not trans widows themselves, so it was really great to hear them say that the film really showed the emotions and the emotional side of things and how delicate it is to sometimes navigate these relationships with the men, especially when there are children involved. And in some of, like, countries like Australia and some of the other countries that of the women that were featured in the documentary, where the laws are, very tilted towards trans identifying men. Um, so it was nice to hear others sort of acknowledge that it is a delicate situation. And it was really nice to see Facebook groups that I'm part of, like, posting about it. So yeah, and I thought to myself, like, there are people who care. So that was, I don't know, like, dare I say, validating, or even though I hate that word. Um, so yeah, I know YouTube has, I think, shadow banned the film and made it, like, difficult for it to come up in search results. But I think the fact that it's still online is fantastic. And I'm sure most of you already know that Lime Soda Films have been releasing short stories of some of the individual stories as well. Um, and again, that's really fantastic. I always push the notification button to get notified when they come out. I must say I haven't been joining the live stream for those, but the very next day I always listen to those. And when I listen to those stories, oh, it's like I have to fight back the urge to yell through my headphones and say, like, my ex did that too. Or like, yep, I felt the same way. Or yes, that happened to me too. And it's like amazing how many similarities there are between these stories, even though most of us are, like, from very different parts of the world and in very different age categories and stages of life, and yeah, things like that. Um, so I hope that the film gives a bit more of an insight into what happens to the wives and children of men who get these magical lady feelings. I hope people who are fortunate enough to not experience it personally can understand how our lives are, like, intertwined with these men because of our kids, even after divorce. Divorce, um, and because of the laws, there is very little, if at all, we can do to keep the children away from them. I know, like, I've seen some people, um, some discourse online, comments being thrown around like, why doesn't she just take the kids away from him? She's just as guilty because she allows him to see the kids. And the reality is, when you live in countries like Australia, there's literally nothing we can do to stop them accessing the kids. In fact, if you try to stop that, we could be held in contempt of court, and like, we could lose more custody and give them more time with the kids, and I definitely don't want that. So yeah, it's a tricky situation, but I hope the film gives a little bit of insight into that, and people can appreciate the um, delicacy of some of the situation. Um, I hope that if any woman sees the film, if any woman who is currently going through a similar situation, or in a marriage or a relationship with cross-sex identifying man, I hope she can watch the film and know that her feelings and experiences are just as real as anybody else's. She isn't a bad person for wanting to leave if that's what she wants to do. Um, there's no obligations to stay with men like that. And what I can tell you is that, as hard as it is at first to leave, if she can logistically do it and separate her life will only improve. So I just hope that there are no, well, my hope is that women who are stuck in relationships and marriages with these type of men can find their way out. I want to say my heartfelt thank you to Vaishnavi and her team at Lime Soda Films for making this documentary. I'm really, really grateful. And also thank you to WDI for giving me the opportunity to talk tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julietta. That was really fascinating to hear, as I thought it would be. It is a brilliant doco. If you haven't seen it yet, why haven't you seen it yet? Go and watch it immediately, and watch Dysphoric again as well. And I think that your comments, Julietta, lead really beautifully into Angie, who has waited patiently. Thank you so much, Angie, for waiting, because Angie is going to talk to us about her work in DV in Victoria. So welcome, Angie Jones. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Janet. Hi, everybody. Yeah, what a great bunch of speakers. It's a hard act to follow. I want to talk to you about a project that I've been involved with for the last few years. To some of you, particularly older feminists who've been, around since the, 60s, 70s, 80s and before, it's going to seem like I'm trying to talk to you about reinventing the wheel. But if you could bear with me, I'll get to why it's important at the end of what I have to say. I've been quite disillusioned with the domestic dog making a noise, sorry, with the domestic violence sector in Australia after, for a long time, because I've, been on the fringe of the feminist movement for a long time. But, particularly for myself, I separated from my ex-partner with 4 children. Had 3 under 5 and a teenager, and it was either become homeless and have legal support to navigate the process of separation, or retain my family home and have no support. So that's when I became quite disillusioned with the alleged services that I assumed would be out there if someone was experiencing family violence, particularly if family violence services had referred them to support. So I wasn't eligible for support because I retained the family home. And I was very privileged to do that, but it was a decision that was forced by the fact that I had 4 young children, including 3 under 5 and a teenager. So anyway, as my children got older, I'd had a bit of a respite from feminism, raising kids, and sort of stumbled back onto the internet around 2016-17, just as word that self-ID was coming in to Victoria. Of course, as a survivor of family violence, as a survivor of other unpleasantries at the hand of men, this absolutely enraged and disgusted me, and I thought there is not a hope in hell that self-ID will ever happen in my city. Well, I was incredibly wrong. Now, the thought of men in domestic violence services was horrific to me. It enrages me. It absolutely enrages me. And I thought, what can I do? I'm just a mum. So I decided to speak out in my own name on Twitter, which I hadn't had much to do with. I didn't understand how it worked. And I decided to create a Twitter account to talk about the impact of self-ID on female-only spaces. And, I began to get lots of followers, and that was way before I got involved with Let Women Speak and all those other things. Now, the COVID pandemic was really stressful for a lot of people, but it also meant an escalation in family violence, particularly in my state. Now, the region that I live in has the second highest rates of family violence, and men were weaponising the COVID pandemic to avoid paying child support or to manipulate access to children in order to manipulate their former partners. I'd had a respite from family violence for 10 years, and when COVID hit, it came back again. yeah, and, you know, I felt very alone. I mean, if everyone felt alone during COVID, particularly in our state, we were the most locked down state in the world. And I, you know, with all this time at home, I thought, what can I do? What can I do to make it easier for women like me who are alone, who are experiencing family violence? And a friend and I, who was also a single mum, said that when the pandemic's over, we're going to start a group, a peer support group. I have a bit of a counselling background, and she's a qualified social worker. You don't need any qualifications to do what we did. So we decided to hold weekly meetings at a local neighbourhood house, and we created a Facebook page. And you had to, you know, go through screening to be admitted to the Facebook page. You had to be local, you had to be a woman, blah, blah, blah. And we screened quite a few women, and then we started holding these weekly meetings where women would just come along, talk about their week, and then, you know, go around the table, talk about their week, and then afterwards we'd have a cup of tea and a piece of cake. And it was a very simple thing to do, but the impact was far reaching. There was connection between women who had felt alone and isolated. And the thing that people don't understand about family violence is that it is isolating even within your community. You know, quite often you can't even talk to your best friend about what's happening. So, you know, it was really profound to come out of COVID and still have some of these restrictions, but to actually meet in person at a distance of 2 metres and get together and talk about what we were going through. And it really reiterated to me the importance of female-only spaces. Now, we were doing this, you know, at our own cost, giving up our time, putting a lot of effort into it. And I thought, you know, it sucks that we're not getting reimbursed. And a few people, including local politicians and the police, who I love to go and shout at about family violence, and people like that, suggested we apply for local government grants. So I looked into it, and we would definitely be eligible, even though we weren't a not-for-profit. But in all of the little tick points and that you had to tick in order to get the grant, you had to not discriminate against anyone with a particular characteristic, which included gender identity. And that, to me, was a catch. I thought, if we tick the box and we get the money and a man comes to our service and we exclude him, even though our service is exclusively for women and for mothers, then we will be in trouble, and we could potentially be asked to give the money back that we'd already spent. Now, that gave us a bit of a headache, and we thought, you know, what are we going to do? So I actually took a leaf out of the Trans Activist book, because I noticed that they were all starting up these little not-for-profits, and then they were accessing different kinds of grants, and they were accessing different kind of funding. And I thought, what if we turn our service into a not-for-profit? That'll make us a little bit more eligible, give us a bit more credibility and a bit of a stronger foundation. And it potentially could also provide employment for us organisers, but also for women, because one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to train women to provide the service that we were providing and have them take that out into the broader community, sort of to start off as one little group with a group of women, and then another little group and another little group. And for me personally, I was inspired by, you know, getting sober back in the 90s, and small groups of women got together and talked about our problems, and, you know, managed to support each other through, you know, early recovery and all the things that happen, you know, to young women in early recovery. So that was sort of at the back of my mind and what inspired me to do this thing, because I knew how powerful it was. And my colleague was obviously inspired by her work in social work and seeing the dire need for female-only social networks and connection. So yeah, we started to apply for to become a not-for-profit. Yeah, and then yeah, the thing that we thought we'd do is, like, you know, we'd use the system to our advantage. But the problem that we had is we applied for not-for-profit status, and in the middle of all that, I was involved with the Let Women Speak rally. And one of the things that is important when you're starting up something that requires a huge degree of honesty is that you're proven to be someone who is of good character. Now, neo-Nazis are not good character, and I was publicly defamed by John Pesutto, and this women's enterprise that we had begun and working towards, and that we had high hopes for, and that was potentially going to provide us with part-time work and take it out into the community, was going to be scuttled by its association with me if perhaps anybody put two and two together. And that, for me, of all the things that happened after Let Women Speak, that was probably the most devastating, because this group was going to be the thing that got me out of the funk that I was in as a single mother of 4 children and got me back into the community and, got me doing something that I love, which is advocacy, and, giving me an opportunity to help other women. And it was potentially scuttled by John Pesutto. And that was, having that hanging over my head and having to explain to the women in my group who had knew nothing about my TERFiness or anything like that, that was really difficult and really devastating. Now, it wasn't all bad, because right in the middle of that, we were thinking, what are we going to do if a Tim comes along and tries to get in our group? And I said to my colleague that we would fight. We would go to any tribunal or whatever, and that we would fight. So we weren't so much worried about the financial side as far as applying for grants and things like that. We were more concerned that a spiteful trans rights activist would try and get us for, excluding him like Tickle did to Sal Grover, or like, people do all the time. And, so in the middle of all that, we were sort of a bit confused. And I mentioned to my colleague that wouldn't it be great if we had like an op shop so we didn't have to apply for grants, because we both love op shop shopping, and we thought, that'd be so cool. And it was just sort of threw it out there that in the future, rather than applying for all these silly grants and having the risk that we would lose our funding at any time because of trans rights extremists, it'd be great to have a source of income. As it happened, I was going past my local op shop, and I went and saw this, we're closing down, a sign up, and I said to them, I wish I'd known, because, my colleague and I, this women's group, because I tell everyone about the women's group that we run, we talked about having it not for profit and having it funded by an op shop. Anyway, the guy who was running the op shop said, I remember you talking to me about this. How about you just have this shop? And I said, excuse me. I mean, I was probably in my pajamas on the back from the school run. And he said, I really believe in what you're doing for local women, and I'm willing to donate all the stock and fittings to you girls, and all you need to do is start paying the bills. And my jaw basically fell on the floor, and I thought, my goodness, we're going to have to do this. Now, we didn't have 2 cents to rub together at the time, but we just quickly decided that this was too good an opportunity. And we were just so grateful that we'd built up such goodwill in the community between COVID and this time last year that we had this opportunity. Now, we wouldn't need to do that. We wouldn't need to have an op shop. We could always still keep applying for grants, but, this was just a blessing. So we took it on. We took over the business, cleaned it up, whatever, and 12 months later, business is booming. We've employed 3 women. We've given volunteer opportunities to a bunch of other women that won't accept payment. They just love being part of our group. And importantly, I can't talk about our name or anything like that, but we've created like a brand within our community that's allowed us to go and advocate like to other women's groups and to domestic violence services and to the police and with other interested parties. And we can go around and advocate to them about the need for female-only services, and particularly services for mothers. Something that a lot of people don't know is that the sector hasn't just been infected by trans-identifying men, but in this process through DEI of desexing all of these organisations, now if a woman becomes homeless or experiences family violence, she's sent into usually a hotel situation or a hostel situation that is mixed sex. Just like they took away female-only hospital wards, they've taken away female-only crisis services as well. So it's not just the very small risk of a trans-identified man coming along. It's the fact that the person in the next room to you is very likely to be, a man who's just out of prison, or someone prostituting themselves, or someone with addiction issues that is homeless. And it is a hostile place for women. Women are choosing to live in their cars with their children rather than access domestic violence services because the services are full of men. They also don't provide female-only staff. So now you can go to a women's hostel thinking that it is just for women, and the counsellors or the service staff who, cook and clean or whatever could also be men. So there really are no longer any female-only spaces in any of the major domestic violence services in my state. It's quite horrific, So what we did is we basically became, same in New South Wales. We basically decided to be the change that we sought. And we're basically a pair of tired mums with lots of kids, with no money. And if we can do it, then anybody can. And, if the trans rights activists can create not-for-profits that benefit their community, then we can do it for ours. But I wouldn't have been able to do this had I not been 55 years old and had grown up being aware of women's services, which at the time, like in the 70s and 80s, were mostly run by lesbian separatists with the help of women from the church, ironically. So if I hadn't had that example from years ago of how to start a women's service and a not-for-profit, we never would have had the idea to do it for ourselves. And all these women who've benefited from it in our community would have never benefited from it. So, it's been a very tumultuous couple of years for me. I've lost a lot of friends and I've made new friends and, it's been quite difficult. But the fact that we've managed to start a grassroots women's service out of nothing brings me immense pride and satisfaction. And, and I urge women who want to see a change to go back and reinvent the wheel and have a think about starting your own service, because you don't need a lot of skill. You just need, I think, a passion to want to help women. And I think everybody here has that. So, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angie. I feel like I'm watching history being made. I often nag the women who created Elsie, for instance, in Sydney, or other friends I'm very honoured to have who created other women's refuges in Australia in the 70s, about, we need all of this written down, we need it all, we need oral history for it, and we've just had that for your service, and that's absolutely amazing, and I couldn't be more thrilled, and what a brilliant model that you have chosen too. So basically a social enterprise and women's service. The number of hearts flooding the screen is overwhelming. So many women sending you little reacts. So thank you so much. And I'd like to thank all our speakers. Thank you so much to Carol Ann, Julietta, Elisabeth, and Angie, who helped us see into her service, and that was amazing. You are all going to be promoted to be panelists soon, and we'll have Q&A, and I will stop the recording now.